You're not really saying that music can kill, are you?
Yes, I am.
Music can be a very powerful thing. Nothing galvanizes the emotions as quickly.
Hello, Katie's. We are going to have a great time together. We are talking with Andrew Reich, the director of a great documentary about Redd Kross called Born Innocent. We don't need to tell you how we feel about Redd Kross and the McDonald brothers. I
Yes,
think they know. Let's be
me
honest.
too. What that
Um,
Osmond said this morning.
well, true. Osmonds and the McDonald brothers.
Hmm.
The movie is great. It's a conversation that goes on a lot longer than some of our other ones, so we want to keep this tight because we just want you to enjoy all of Andrew's stories and insights into what he learned spending years at putting this film together. Where did your love of Redd Kross start?
In high school, in 1984, 85, Morristown, New Jersey. I was a hardcore kid. Like I had, discovered punk rock, like the Clash and the Sex Pistols and the Ramones from my older sister's record collection, age-old story.
Hmm.
And then a friend of hers had like given me an issue of Maximum Rock and Roll and like maybe the Not So Quiet on the Western Front compilation and a few other records, Let Them Eat Jelly Beans, like, and I was just like all in hardcore, fanatic. And there was one other kid at Morristown High that was into it too, and we both got our FCC licenses and became DJs on our high school radio station, WJSV, mostly just so we could try and get free records. And we both did these like punk and hardcore shows, which no very there was WFMU was doing it in New Jersey too, but there was very little else. And then we just started like sending on the WJSV letterhead like letters to every record label we could find in Flipside and Maximum Rock and Roll. Here's our playlist. We're playing this stuff. Send us free records. And so one of the records that showed up was Teen Babes from Monsanto by Redd Kross. And I think at that point, it was very much not in the vein of most of what I was listening to, but I just loved it so much. I hadn't heard any of the original, it's all cover versions except for one song. It's like a cover of their own song. But I didn't really know that. I hadn't heard those songs before, but I just loved the whole vibe of that record, and it was sort of mysterious. The cover's weird, the insert was weird, it's Lori Partridge on the inside. It's just like it was just such a mix of things, but it was also speaking to all the TV that I had grown up with. But that was not really a part of kind of the hardcore, especially those New York hardcore bands. Like none of that was in the mix, but it was kind of I had a nostalgia for that, and so it was just blending together all these things, and it just sounded so great. It was definitely not a hardcore record at all, but there was a heaviness. There wasn't anything wimpy about it. It was just so cool, and so I just loved it. And that really started the kind of romance. And then I was in college when the next record, which was Neurotica, came out, and that was also just this sort of mind blowing. Like, how is this hitting every pleasure center? How is this like
Right.
mixing up every element in the perfect way that it's just like I can never get tired of hearing this record, and any college party like we can put this record on and it's just fun and and great and um very different from the record before. And then from then on every record just sort of changed the formula a bit, but just still always was just inspired so much joy. And I feel like, throughout my life, once I had an iPod and, you got thousands and thousands of songs, you put it on shuffle, and every time a Redd Kross song would come on, it's just like, oh, this just makes me happy. It just puts me in a very specific good mood. Um, so didn't get to see them live until I moved to LA in 1990, and I don't know what year the first time I would have seen them, like 91 maybe or something. And so once I was living in LA and I was getting to see them, that added even like more intensity to the fandom because they put on the most amazing live show. Again, you have a smile on your face like the whole time. I just saw them last night.
Oh,
Yeah, they
Man.
played and at the Lodge Room in Highland Park here in LA, and keep in mind I had just gone to Australia for a couple screenings of the film, and I saw them 3 times in Australia over the course of a couple weeks, and that was just a couple weeks ago. But I went and saw them again last night, and it's just like the time just flies by. Just every
Yeah.
song is amazing. Um, so yeah, just I'm a fan of a ton of bands, but there's something always special about my love for for Redd Kross. They're just sort of in a category of their own, um, and then I think I kind of remember being at a show in maybe 2014 and at the El Rey Theater here in Los Angeles. And somehow it was just occurring to me that I was just like, this is the ultimate Los Angeles band. Like everything in Los Angeles music connects to Redd Kross. They're at the center of it all. You name a band and there's like a connection to them. They are the band of the last, 4 decades. And sort of, like I think it was talking to Roddy Bottom from Faith No More, who was there, who's sort of a friend about it. And that just, I was just thinking about that. And then I guess maybe it was 2015 when Steve McDonald was on the Turned Out a Punk podcast, and he told the story of his abduction when he was a kid. And it was just this kind of thing like, oh man, on top of just everything I love about this band and find fascinating about this band, there's this insane story that I had never heard. And that was when, I talked to my wife, just sort of telling her the summary of that story and just going like, this band, like someone's got to make a documentary about this band. And she was just like, well, why don't you do it in this very casual way? It's just like, and it seemed like a very crazy idea, never having made a movie or documentary or anything. But then the more I started thinking about it, it was just sort of like, I think maybe I could do this. And I think I would really love doing it. And I really want to watch this movie, and no one else seems to be making it. So I had a connection to Steve McDonald through a friend who's a good friend who's also good friends with him, and I was just asked him, "Will you connect us?" And so I can maybe just run this idea by Jeff and Steve and see if they would maybe be up for taking a flyer, and they were. So yeah.
were they? I know, like the book, the memoir. Now You're One of Us, and the film kind of had this great synergy of release and everything. So you kind of got, for fans, we got just like more McDonald's than you could ever hope for in a 12-month span. But there's, like you said, there's so much in there and so many stories that I hadn't heard before, that we hadn't heard before or read other places. Were they open to that, kind of the full warts and all story? Had they started on the book and were kind of like...
No, the book came quite a bit later. I mean,
Okay.
the book started to happen when the movie was already done pretty much. The festival cut of the movie was already done. I think it already screened when that book project came up, because I remember when um, the sort of agent who was putting that together connected me. I was like, I have a cut that you can maybe show to some publishers. Maybe the fact that there is this documentary will help sort of,
Nice.
sell that. So,
Well, then,
but
to that point, like, kind of, were they open to telling all these stories?
they really were. I mean, they were, and I didn't quite know what to expect, having like grown up reading fanzine interviews with them, and they're wise asses. Like,
Right.
Hmm.
those interviews, they rarely gave a straight answer. Just tell the most insane, made up stories about themselves and their, it was just sort of like, messing with whoever the interviewer was. And so I was like, am I going to get that? But it was clear, like, No, they for the very first day had them both, sit down in the interview. That was the day where, Steve told the story of the abduction. They, from the get-go, it was all just like they were going to tell it, um, warts and all for sure. And, there were times where they disagreed about how things had got down and whatever. And also just like Steve is just a complete open book. And we'll just, talk about everything and his real feelings of jealousy of other bands or whatever it is,
Right.
disappointment. Jeff is a more reserved and um, just much more sort of in control of what he, wants to put out there. But I think over time, as um, he got more comfortable with me, we got to know each other better. I feel like we got, deeper into stuff. There's still areas where, I mean, it's clear in the film when I'm talking to him about the drug, stuff.
Yeah.
Like he really did like he just switched to a third person recounting of this sort of abstract, story of a hypothetical drug addicted youth, in a band, like, but not using any first person pronouns or anything. And I kind of called him on it, but it was just, it was clear, especially on that topic, like there was only so far he was willing to go. But, I do think, Dan Epstein for the book took this different tack, which was like he just interviewed them both separately the whole time. It was just these separate interviews, which is cool, and I think worked out great for the book. It was interesting to me to have them both, and when we were like, there's just all these the dynamics you really get to see, and you see it on film when Steve's telling that story of the abduction. It's just like Jeff was sort of sitting there as if like he had never really heard these stories before. Like it seemed like they had never really talked about it, and the times where you see that they, there's tensions and
They're siblings.
they're siblings. Sometimes it was just like, oh geez, say like there was like, did I just break up Redd Kross? Like, did it was just like, no,
What have I
like,
done?
yeah, they're fine the next day, right? They're just
Right.
like, their siblings are used to this. They've gotten over a million things. And, but yeah, I was so pleased how, eager and willing they were to just like, we're going to tell the story. And they're such good storytellers, and there are so many stories. Obviously the book can go into a lot of things in the book were stories they told me to. I just couldn't find room for it. I just wanted this movie to be to be enjoyed by someone who had never heard of Redd Kross. Like that was just my North Star always. It was like, this isn't just this isn't fan service. This is someone who's like a fan of underground music or whatever it is, like fan of some of the other bands who are in the movie, curious, doesn't know Redd Kross. I always had that viewer in my head. And so some of this stuff, it's just like, yeah, it's interesting to a Redd Kross fan, but I can't take the time. I got to keep this like tight and moving. So it was hard because there's hilarious stories. There's stuff that I just loved, but that I had to, some of it's in the bonus disc of the Blu-ray, but a lot of it's in the book. So it is just like, it's a great thing. I was, in the band, like watch the movie. And then if you're just really, you want to go deeper, then read the book.
Well, and we read the book first, just the timing wise, because I saw
Mm.
the film at Third Man in Detroit, and it still works. Like either if you're, but we were already fans. So, but I think what you were saying about like how the interviews were different, it was a whole different perspective on these stories, seeing it in the film and to watch the interactions, like you're saying, and there are little details that are slightly different, not because they're telling it differently, but anytime anyone tells a story, you don't say the exact same little pieces. So
Yeah.
they complement each other so beautifully, and the fact that they were done so independently is great. And I loved the sibling rivalry. It was so, I mean, it's there, but that they were so, it
Yeah.
was great. It's great. It's such a great film. I mean, I can't
And
wait to own it.
and the book is great, and I
Yeah.
will give them all the credit in the world. But to Heidi's point, seeing the two of them sit there and kind of disagree about certain points, or just that one sequence you have where they're going through their record collection. You can never do that in print, and it's so
Right.
great, and you really get a sense of their love of this stuff, and none of it is ironic or joking. It is,
No.
we truly love that Partridge Family record.
Yeah.
Right.
And there's so much, yeah, you're right, because there's in that record closet scene, and Jeff says, this is my copy of the White Album. And Steve's like, well, our copy. It's like there's all these moments like that. The
Yes.
little brother, he's
Yes.
the little brother still trying to like get in there, and later, Jeff's like, I would pool my money to buy a record, and Steve's like, well, I would pool my money too, And
Right.
it's just, you're just seeing that dynamic that continues. They became, I was when I'm sort of talking about the movie to people now, I'm like, this is a movie about two brothers who became business partners at ages 11 and 15 and still are to this day.
Yes. Well, I think that's the other thing too that I sometimes forget, because rock stars don't age. They are eternally perfect looking in my mind. I forget the age gap, that it was big when they were starting out. It's not big now, but it was big at that age. Those are two very different stages of life. And then the younger one is the one who's off getting kidnapped, which is quite the story, and having very adult experiences. It's crazy, but yeah, and they're still doing it. And arguably, to some people, bigger today and more successful today than they have ever been.
Yeah, that's what's so great. I mean, seeing them last night, it's like, and I brought a friend who, we share so much of the same musical taste, but, he tends to be, he likes more sort of difficult music, sort of more artier, and so Redd Kross, he's always loved, but probably more like Born Innocent or the Posh Boy EP, and and he was just like, he's like, this is so great, and there's nothing about it that feels like a nostalgia act. Like, so many times we go see these bands that we loved as kids that are, and it feels like it's great, but it's a nostalgia act. And with them, it's just like the new songs fit so seamlessly into the set, and everyone's excited. I'm so excited to hear Candy Colored Catastrophe or
I love Candy Colored Catastrophe.
Like, I'll Take Your Word for It. Like, these songs are not like, all right, I got to sit through the new songs to hear it. It's like, no, I'm just as excited to hear the new songs. That last record is incredible. They're better than ever. And when does that happen? Like, it's so hard for me to think of another band that's been around as long where it's like, no, they're kind of peaking right now.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Well,
or maybe not. Maybe 10 years from now.
Yeah, maybe they will. Yeah.
Well, it's amazing.
And the fact that in making that record, you asked them to do a song for the film, and they wrote Born Innocent, which eventually they ended up putting on the record that they like so much. And then to our last point, the fact that the first and second verse are both of them telling their own origin stories. And it's so interesting how the things that both of them sort of pull on lyrically to tell that story. Stevens, I thrive, survive, Hollywood ain't no place for a child.
Yeah.
And then Jeff's is much more just like, I had this one job, it was just to get the guitar, and then I was out, and that's all I've ever done. And like, it's sort of, do you at any point as a fan, for as long as you have been, look back and go like, I kind of helped put that song on that record?
Yes, I do think, I mean, because I'm not taking, like in any way, like sole credit for that record's existence. And
No,
yet
certainly.
I will take some credit because they're not really, they're not a huge, super prolific band, and they hadn't been really, after researching the blues, there wasn't a lot of new material. And, I did, give them an assignment. Like, I did sort of say, could you write a song? And maybe it could be a song like History Lesson Part 2 by the Minutemen, and it's so funny because, Jeff was like, oh yeah, okay, you mean like Creek Alley by the Mamas and the Papas, which is just love, because it's like, That's such a
Amazing.
The
that's the
Minutemen
best.
and the Mamas and the Papas. Perfect.
Yes,
Yep.
yes.
Yeah.
Such a Jeff McDonald place
So
to go,
great.
like,
Oh,
and the fact that they wrote it and then I hear, they send me just like a demo or whatever, and I was just like, oh my God, this song rules, like, and that it was just like that songwriting process and the sort of really writing it together, which is not normally had they done things in the past. It was like
Hmm.
Steve would write some songs, Jeff would write the bulk of the music, and that they started writing together in that way, and that sort of burst of creativity that came out of that, made them go like, I think we have like just about enough songs for a double album, like the same amount of songs as Exile on Main Street. So like officially we have a double album.
yes.
Like if we can include Born Innocent, like are you okay with us putting Born Innocent? And of course I was, gonna say yes, but like I mean it's crazy to me that I sort of entered the timeline and affected events in that
Yeah.
way.
Totally. Yes.
And then just to go and uh hear these songs from that record and just think like, oh, maybe this record wouldn't have existed had this like it's so cool, it's so cool.
Amazing.
And they're talking in that song in an honesty and a very much one-to-one way that they don't in Bubblegum Factory or Elephant Flares, which maybe
Right.
they are, and I'm just
No,
not
they're
hip
not
to
really.
it.
I mean, it's like they're not confessional. Jeff McDonald, so he's not a confessional songwriter. Steve is again hard on his sleeve, like open book. Like
Yeah.
he can be in his songs a bit more, when you think about a song from um There's No One Like You from Beyond the Door, like that's really a song about his son in this very like confessional way, but generally no, they're not. You're there last time, I was like thinking about these songs and it was just like, oh, Jimmy's Fantasy is about the Jimmy Page segment and the
Right.
song remains the same,
Yeah.
and Annie's Gone is about Sherry Curry's character in Foxes, and like these
Yeah.
things that are all just like they're very pop culture referential, and he's allowing you to put whatever meanings you want onto these songs, but they're never like this is my story.
Right.
Like he doesn't lay it out there in the way that song, it's cool that they wrote that way in a way that they hadn't before, and then just put it in this like great, Who kind of like just balls
Mhm.
out rocker. It's so good.
Totally.
Yeah. And of all the titles to choose as well for like full circle moments of it as well.
Right.
Yeah.
So in doing this, how much of the story did you learn from them firsthand? Were you sitting there going, "Oh, I didn't know that." You mentioned Stevens.
Yeah, I mean, there were definitely things, I had heard Steve tell that story, but obviously, I got a lot more detail when they told that, but there were a bunch of things. I mean, I wasn't that aware that they had drug problems. That part of it, which I didn't spend a ton of time in the movie just because I sort of agree with Jeff that it's kind of boring. It's just like it's in every rock doc, and like it's not the most. It's like the 50th most interesting thing about the band, but a lot of
But
that
that
was
PSA, the
yeah
PSA you
the
included,
PSA.
that was amazing.
It's amazing. I didn't know about that going in. I was not aware of that, and when I found that, I was just like, "What? How is this?" Because I didn't even know. I mean, I didn't know that he and Vicky Peterson from the Bangles had dated. So yeah, there was plenty of stuff that I learned. I mean, I knew a fair amount, enough to just sort of like the conversations would be kind of, like, okay, let's talk about, how did you, how did you meet Black Flag, and how did you get hooked up with Posh Boy, and then later, like, just sort of like, these milestones, mostly of the records, right? Just sort of, and then they would just like, I would ask a question, and maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I got to ask another question,
That's the
But in the
best.
meantime, they would just like tell the most incredible stories, and so yeah, I mean, I definitely learned a lot over the course of making it. If they filled in so many gaps that I didn't know. I didn't really, that like the Victor and Drizzo period, which, when Victor was their drummer, which is not really, he's sort of a little bit on Third Eye, but he left during the making of it and they didn't, he's not on the cover because he was out of the band. Um, so that whole period, I really didn't know much about, but he's the most incredible drummer, and the band at that time, the live material from that, and there's on the Blu-ray uh, bonus features disc, there's like a full rehearsal of that lineup at Dave Nasworthy's, at the Nas pad at the Dave Nasworthy's house, the rehearsal space, and it's like it's such a revelation. Like I put some clips up on Instagram, but watching that, it will blow your mind because it's not really. I love Third Eye, but they're playing these songs from Third Eye, but it's not what they sound like on the record. They just sound like more like almost sort of Phase Shifter era, just like full on rock band with the most incredible drummer. And it was, if you lived in LA at the time and were seeing that lineup, they played it a lot, but it was just sort of this forgotten, era for me because he's not really on, fully on any of the records. So stuff like that was just like really cool to find out. I didn't know I didn't know who all the drummers were when I started doing this.
So being such a fan and the way you came to this, I know when we had the opportunity to interview them, we were so geeked up like small children and figuring it out. Like, what's our first question? Do you remember what your first question was or what you went in thinking your first question needed to be?
Well, I guess, really, and look, same. I was so intimidated at the beginning, especially, by Jeff, because again, like Steve is just, he's so warm and like
He's your pal.
he puts you at your ease. Like he's just,
Yeah.
and it's not like Jeff's not like a jerk or in any way.
No.
Jeff's great too, but he just has a little bit more of a, um,
The wall is a little
he's more reserved. He's more,
Yeah.
and so it can just you can just make you a little more scared at the beginning. Now, I mean, it's just like I consider him a friend. I mean, I've got not a bad word to say in any, about either.
No.
But it was intimidating for sure. Honestly, the very first interview was, so what happens, like they agreed to do this. And then pretty soon after, they were getting the very first lineup of the band from when they were called the Tourists. They're getting that lineup back together to play a benefit for Des Cadena, of Black Flag and Redd Kross, who had cancer. And, so it was like, oh my God, I need to film that. Like, I need to. So the very first day of shooting was shooting the rehearsal of the Tourists lineup. So Greg Hetson's there, which is so cool to me because my very first concert I ever went to was the Circle Jerks,
Oh,
and and so I got getting to meet Greg Hetson was just really cool. But so the interviews that there's a bunch of it in the movie. With that lineup, with John Stilo and Greg Hetson and the two of them. So the first questions were just sort of like, how did this, band come together? Like, how did, what's the origin story of this?
yeah.
And so, it was quite a long interview with the four of them, really going, talking about how it, and that really, so I forget at what point they started telling that story, but
Yeah.
just talking about what
Awesome.
the South Bay scene was and these like cover bands and all that, and just I think they and Jeff and Greg meeting in photography class at Hawthorne High
Yeah.
and going through that.
Amazing.
So that was the first day, and it was just like, I mean, I was so in heaven, just like getting
Yeah.
in a room with all of them and hearing these stories. And that's when they told the story of the eighth grade graduation party and, and going to the church and playing in front of Black Flag and all this stuff. It's just like, stories that are just so in my sweet spot. Like I just like
Right.
nothing I want to hear more than stories about the church, and
Yeah.
So it was really cool.
That's awesome.
How have they been as archivists? And how much stuff did you have to go out and dig up?
They're bad archivists, unfortunately. They're not good archivists. I mean, it really was. Jeff gave me, he went out to his garage and he just gave me all these boxes of stuff. And everything was in there, fan mail, VHS tapes, some fanzines, just, none of it organized in any way. And so I had to just go through all of that. It was a lot of stuff. Had to get a VCR, had to just like watch all of those tapes and just like keep track of what was on all of them. And there was some incredible stuff, and there was a lot of stuff that I couldn't use. But there, no systematic, nothing like in the Wham documentary when like his mom has like those scrapbooks of
Yes.
like every single thing. Like there was nothing that
Unbelievable.
organized.
Mhm.
So, but there was a ton of material that was great. There were all those like those envelopes from the photomat kind of thing of like
Mhm.
Hmm.
pictures, and so there's stuff in there. And then so that was uh, a huge treasure trove of stuff that it was very useful for me. So I guess I mean they're not terrible archivists in that they had the stuff,
Right.
just not organized. And then Robert Hecker, their guitarist, for many years, he had a box of tapes that there were some overlap, but a lot of stuff that only he had, and those were at least in his beautiful tiny little handwriting. It was exactly what was on the tape, including like song lists and stuff. So that was kind of great to just like have that. Um, and there was sort of two VHS tapes that I got sort of through the Burger Records guys and like this guy Jack Sample. That was like a compilation of just Redd Kross material. And I think on that maybe the Rock Against Drugs was on there, and there was just a lot of great stuff on there, and it was kind of
Awesome.
organized well. That also had like on the tape label like what was on there. So those were key. And then I guess, John Kropp, who runs their website and has done a lot of the graphic design for their records, he sent me a box of tapes that he had collected over the years. So that was the bulk of it. And then it was just kind of like, being on eBay, and sometimes you'd see a bootleg DVD, live DVD or something would come up, and I would buy those. Or, once I did the Kickstarter, putting the word out, and some things came to me that way. Some cool live, tapes from like Neurotica and Third Eye era. But this stuff, there was no way to. You couldn't hire an archival producer and just say go search in the MTV archives or whatever. And they're
Right.
just I think we tried. It just didn't turn up a lot of stuff. So
Mhm.
it's really. I said to someone else recently, I was like, I think there's probably more high quality photographs and video of Red Cross from the last 3 weeks than from the first like 30 years of their career.
Yeah.
It's just like they were not a mainstream band. No one
Mhm.
was. So when you could find those things, when you could find professionally shot, footage, it was just like it was amazing to find, but it was hard.
Yeah, I feel like one of the few things I always see on YouTube is from the Phase Shifter era, which was sort of where I came into the story, was that lady in the front row from the Tonight Show, and other
Yeah.
than that, it's hard. And the impression that show had on me, I mean, clearly they stuck around, but just yeah, it's not out there, and it's a lot of digging to find this stuff, and just to have someone like you come along and just sort of like put it all together and just sort of say like, here's all of this. I did the research and I did the digging, so you don't have to.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to put the whole thing together?
Um, it was sort of like a period of like 7, 8 years. And so 2015, I think, was when that tourists reunion was. So that was like sort of day one of shooting. Between 2015 and 2019, which is when I did the Kickstarter, work was very sporadic. I was, busy doing my day job and like as a TV writer and showrunner, and so I was just like every 4, 5, 6 months I would like do another interview with them, and during that time I was still kind of like going through the tapes and going through those boxes, but I was not working on it in really any systematic, like really focused way. Um, and I was realizing like, okay, this may never get finished at this rate. And that's when I thought of doing the Kickstarter. And then once I did that, first of all, I had then money to really like hire the, small film crew. And also you've taken people's money, you have to deliver it.
Right.
So once I did that, that's
Absolutely.
when I really got serious. I did most of um, the interviews with all the people who aren't Jeff and Steve, during that time. And, I got really focused about it. I had my lists of people I wanted to talk to and set about like trying to like track them down and schedule them. And I really, there's names on that list that, I wanted to talk to Quentin Tarantino. He didn't want to, there's a few names that I like, um, no one's super important, really. Like I wanted to talk to Chuck Dukowski from Black Flag, and he was just kind of reluctant. But it's just like, oh, I have other members of Black Flag. It
Right.
wasn't that important. And then there's people like, okay, I know like Billy Joe Armstrong is a fan. Like it'd be cool to have, him in the film, but it's not like it wasn't really that important because it's not like he's some witness to any of the story. And mostly I
Right.
wanted to not fill it with just famous people who like the band, but more people who were a part of the story, who saw them at key moments. And so I really hit just about everyone. And I remember
Mhm.
two of the laughs I got were Mark Arm and Steve Turner from Green River and Mudhoney. And it was like, as we were saying goodbye, it was they were going back up to Seattle, and it was like February, March 2020. And it was like, do we shake hands or do we
Oh my
not? Like,
Oh,
God.
wow.
What do
and
we
then like
do?
right after that, like the world shut down. And
Yeah.
so it was then like the editing process was happening sort of remotely once I found an editor, and everything was sort of slowed down by both that and just like because at that point my job, I had to get transcribe all the interviews and start putting this all together, and it was a little bit hard to motivate when you were mostly worried about like keeping your kids alive and like your like it
Sure.
was
Yeah.
hard so um it's that took a while because of just the nature of that time. So yeah, it took a long time. Like the movie took a long time, and many impatient Kickstarter supporters like, "Where's this movie?" But I'm like, "Have you ever made a movie?" Like
Right.
Right.
it's
Like,
hard. It's hard. There's so many things that you have to, clearances and all that stuff just really like takes a long time. And I wanted it to be good. It was just like I mostly cared about. It was like at some point I got to show this movie to Jeff and Steve, and
Mhm.
I want them to like it, and I want them to feel like I really like did justice to and so that was the pressure more than almost anything, to the
Yeah.
point where I did have like a rough cut that I felt like I could show them. And when they liked it, it was almost it was hard to keep going from that point because I felt such a sense of accomplishment at that.
Right.
Hmm.
I was like, they liked it. I'm
Yay.
done. I did it. But it was like the movie was still so far from being finished. But that was just like the greatest moment, and it was intense, I think, for them because they were seeing their parents talk about this horrible time and they never talk about it. And
Yeah.
and their dad is such a sort of man's man, like, dirt bike riding, precision machinist, just like 50s dad. And he tears up and he gets emotional,
Yeah.
and they like never see that. And I think that really sort of hit them hard. Um, and so, yeah, that was just, that screening. And then once it was really done pretty much like I and everything was just we kept just not getting into these festivals we wanted to get into South by Southwest or Tribeca, just getting rejected and like waiting and waiting until I was finally like, you know what, I'm just gonna get a screening room and invite, a lot of the people that are in the movie and just, and just have this sort of friends and family screening. And that was the first time that I, sort of got to see the movie with an audience, and it was a very, it's like the band members and like and
Yeah.
and that was just so great, because I just sort of saw like, okay, it works the way I hoped it would. Like people are laughing, like what
Mhm.
I, hoped they would laugh, and it's just like, that screening was just so cool.
That's awesome.
So what's the next step after this? Is there a Tater Tots documentary coming?
Yeah, geez, I've satisfied a lot of disgruntled fans with the Blu-ray because there is at least the Desperate Teenage Love Doll Superstar,
Mhm.
like, pretty long featurette on there because a lot of people were upset that that wasn't in the movie. Tater Tots, I really didn't cover, perhaps the way some people would have wanted me to. There's more Tater Tots in the Bill Bartel documentary than I can I can provide. So no, and there's not going to be a Z Malibu Kids
That was my follow-up. Yeah.
either. Another chapter that I didn't really have time to, give its due, but that's a really deep cut, even though that record is great. The secret of this movie really is that it's Born Innocent, the Jeff and Stephen McDonald story.
Right.
And so that's really what it is. So there are things that are sort of part maybe of the Redd Kross story, but aren't really part of the Jeff and Steve McDonald story. I mean, it's why,
Mhm.
Desperate Teenage Love Dolls is like Steve really had a much bigger part in that than Jeff, and
Mhm.
nothing's going on in that Jeff and Steve McDonald story during that time.
Mm,
So that's why I was just like, it didn't, as I was watching, it was in the cut for a while, but I'm like, this
Mhm.
is sort of sagging here because what we get invested in is their relationship and the ups and downs of their relationship, and this was just a sort of interesting to some pause to tell the story of these like cult classics, but it
Mhm.
really nothing's going on in that Jeff and Steve McDonald story during that. And that's the case with Tater Tots and with some of these things, it's just like
right.
they're cool, but they're not pushing forward, there's no dramatic story beats in that story, which is what
Right.
I was really, wanting to tell. And so yeah, you do have to like cut things that you love and that may be really interesting to you, but I was trying to keep that hypothetical audience member who had never heard a note of Redd Kross before in mind and wonder like, are they tuning out here? And if they are,
Right.
like, yeah, let me cut this.
And you can't
Yeah.
make the film that does touch on Z Malibu Kids and then
Yeah.
also keeps the newbie completely like enraptured. It's a
Right.
delicate.
Yeah. I mean, there's
Well,
stuff like, I sort of almost forget, like there was like that incredible thing where Steve added bass lines to all the songs on White Blood Cells by the White
mhm.
Stripes, and he put it out
Yep.
as Red Blood Cells.
Uh-huh.
Broke the internet, and like, it was just like at that time the very nascent internet, and it's such a crazy cool
Totally.
thing. And
Hmm.
but there's no room for that, right? There's just like,
Right.
Yeah.
there's no room to put that in.
And what's that story other
Yeah,
than he did this thing?
he
And
did this thing,
And it
and
was
it was
yeah,
cool.
really cool.
yeah.
And like the next, the opening notes on the next White Stripes album are the opening notes of the Seven Nation Army. It's just like,
Right.
huh, like that,
You
based
know.
like,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Um, when we spoke with them, I believe Stephen was preparing to go out on some leg of Melvin's tour. I think it was with the
Mhm.
Suicidal Tendencies. I think was that anyway.
I-
And
Napalm Death, maybe. I mean, they.
yes, that's what it was.
Yeah,
Yes,
that
yeah.
is what it was.
And he held up a small travel guitar that he had and said, "Hey Jeff, I didn't mention to you this before, but I'm taking this, and I've got a few things we can talk about later." To which our hearts obviously went pitter patter. Um, this can be off the record if need be, but in seeing them recently, did they hip you to anything coming down the pike? It just because as a Red Cross fan, just knowing they are out there and still doing this is amazing and wonderful. And to see their photos and videos on Instagram is great, but one obviously is always like they can make another record. Like
Yeah.
there would
I
never
think
be.
there, I think there will, I don't have any, bombshells to drop or anything, but I think that they are working on some new songs. I haven't heard anything. I haven't gotten to hear a demo, and I haven't heard anything, but I know um Steve very much wants that, and I feel like they last night kind of felt like the end of a very long like tour for the Red album.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they're going to
Sure.
Spain soon, and then they're going to Brazil, and they've got those. But this was sort of like I think they're thinking of this is the end of the Red album tour. So I think they want to to get another record out, and I think it's probably the same kind of push pull thing where it's like Steve trying to get Jeff to like focus and do it,
Mm-hmm.
and it's probably they've toured a lot, and I'm sure Jeff wants to just like relax for a while, but I'm hopeful that they will like be working on some new songs, and I feel like they're feeling the momentum that they have right now, and they're not going to just be like, okay, we're hanging it up now. Like, no, they'll keep going. I think they've felt the love that's out there for them, and they know like people want to hear a new record, and that last one, whatever. There's now a high bar, um, but it's also like, God, that last record, is
I
so
know.
good. So like,
It's so
why would
good.
you stop? Like,
Mm-hmm.
they talk about how they haven't used up all their songwriting eggs, because they just haven't been super prolific. Like they
Right.
still
Yeah.
have it in them, and it's really interesting. The Q&A in Australia, like someone asked about the songwriting process. And Jeff was just like, he's like, I just, I think of a song that I love, and I just try and learn to play it, and then I just kind of just start messing around with it. The example, he was like, I was just learning to play "They Don't Know About Us" by Kirsty McCall, and that will be like I'm hoping to at some point soon hear a song from, and it's just like this started out as just me playing "They Don't Know About Us,"
Yeah.
and it's now like
Awesome.
this. It was interesting. That's not Steve's process, but I don't know, it was kind of cool. So
Awesome.
that when I just heard Jeff saying that and saying just the other day I was doing this, like, so he was doing his songwriting process,
That's
Right.
something. Yeah.
gets me excited
Yeah.
that like, okay, there's gonna be
Yeah.
more.
And
It's awesome.
and hopefully they'll have you in the studio for sort of a getting back type thing of
Yes, it's perfect.
just Dale Crover sitting in the corner doing the Ringo of just keeping 4/4 on the snare. It'd be great. Born Innocent, the Redd Kross story, is available right now to stream or to get on DVD or Blu-ray. We highly recommend the Blu-ray. For more information and to get the streaming links, check out their website, redcrossfilm.com, or you can find them on Facebook, facebook.com/borninnocent Redd Kross.